Media outlets, which Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says is about reciprocity, citing that for years, the Chinese have imposed harsh surveillance, harassment, even intimidation against American journalists operating in their country. This on the heels of China's expulsion of 3 Wall Street Journal reporters. So for more on this, we'll talk to Professor of Law at the University of Georgia, Titus Nichols will weigh in. Professor Nichols, thanks for being with us. So this is the latest round of tit for tat between the U.S. and China. This time it is a war on the press. First, do you find that the U.S. actions against Chinese state media here in America, is it proportionate to the expulsion of those 3 Wall Street Journal reporters, even though the State Department says that's not the case? Let's call a spade a spade. Is it proportionate?
Thanks, Manila. The issue here is that the Trump administration has to take a strong position, but at the same time, they don't want to overplay their hand because China is one of our largest trading partners. It's a situation where you have to give a response, but it has to be measured so that you have plausible deniability to say, well, no, we weren't trying to be juvenile and just go tit for tat, but we were doing it for this legitimate purpose.
And how does this new designation of China's 5 media outlets stateside, saying they're called on a foreign mission for China, just stopping short of calling them foreign agents, how does that shape how other foreign correspondents might behave or report the news? I mean, does it influence behavior? Do you think that that was the aim of the State Department?
It's typically it's a shot across the bow because of the fact that the designation you use for these types of corporations has a significant effect. So they don't cross the line of saying it's a foreign agent because then there's different legal responsibilities, such as registering as a foreign agent. However, you're sending a message to the smaller entities that's saying that if we get you within our spotlight, it's going to cause trouble for how you operate here in America.
Interesting. The legal ramifications is really where it's at, isn't it? And to the credit of Mike Pompeo, though, it is true that China is really no beacon of free press either. I mean, information about Tiananmen Square is effectively wiped off the internet in China. You can't just go Google something. I mean, that Google doesn't really exist there. Nobody can report on that in particular. But what exactly is the State Department trying to prove, do you think, by forcing these outlets stateside to cut almost half of their staff? I mean, 42%.
Well, Manila, it's essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to starve them out. It would be overbroad for them to simply just prevent them from operating here in America. So essentially what they're doing is they're limiting the capacity they have for their employees to come work and actually do the job of the company. And you also, as you brought up before, China itself is no beacon of freedom of speech. You saw the situation in regards to the medical personnel who were trying to spread the word about the coronavirus and how China responded there. But here, America is simply trying to flex their muscle in a more tactful way.
Now, Professor Nichols, some people would argue that the United States, even though we say that we have freedom of speech and we say we have freedom of the press, that the U.S. effectively suppresses free press here as well. How would you respond to that, especially being that you're a professor? How do you respond to students when they ask stuff like that?
In America, we have much more freedom. Anybody can create a blog post criticizing the government. However, the government does have limits to in what situations you can say certain things, and they definitely have laws in regards to libel or slander laws. You can say whatever you want just as long as you know it's not false. If you do, then that puts you in the realm of being liable for a lawsuit. So while we don't have absolute freedom of the press, we do enjoy freedoms and privileges that other countries can't even imagine.
Now, real quickly, speaking of libel and what have you, I'd like your comments on longtime host Chris Matthews at MSNBC stepping down. He's made apparently some lewd comments to women in the past, and obviously he was on air comparing Bernie Sanders' win in New Hampshire to the Nazi takeover of France. What's your take on that?
We live in a different time now where what might have been acceptable 15 or 20 years ago is no longer acceptable. It's particularly with the networks such as MSNBC, to have someone on the air comparing the front-runner presidential candidate to the Nazi invasion. It's just something that in this day and age you can't allow to happen. There's also the issue of that Chris Matthews' statements were unacceptable, and the network is not willing to put up with these unacceptable statements just because he's a popular entity on the network.
All right, we will leave it right there. Professor Titus Nichols, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insights today.
Glad to be here.